Kristen Deasy, and she's the founder of The Human Condition. Kristen's going to share her story basically of coming out of darkness. So when I met you at the first time, we were on retreat together, and you just had this peaceful presence. Basically, I was like, oh, I just want to talk to her. And then when you told me you had struggled so much in high school with thoughts of suicide, depression, I was like, oh my gosh, this girl has a story. God must have brought her a long way. So can you start off by just sharing with us, how did the struggles start? Were the initial triggers?
Yeah, I think a lot of it happened early years in high school, and I think I just attributed a lot of my symptoms to, I was a teenage girl, early in high school, transitioning, finding her place with friends and friend groups. So I really just neglected a lot of the symptoms that I had, and also struggled a lot with stigma around mental illness. So because of the negative stereotypes and attachments that I placed on mental illness, it was really difficult for me to kind of see that I was struggling internally. So I think that pushed off my initial diagnosis for quite a few years, because I really just could not come to terms within myself of realizing that I was struggling with these things. And over time, putting on multiple masks every day to just kind of appear as normal in front of my family and friends, it starts to fall off. It starts to become more exhausting to kind of put on this show, put on this act every day. And eventually I think my parents just were like, our daughter is a little bit off, she's a lot more, just temperamental and moody and kind of more severe than what a teenage girl would be experiencing. And so they really were the first ones to kind of recognize that within me, and pushed me to seek counseling and therapy, and ultimately really begin the healing process of dealing with mental illness.
So you said it escalated during your teenage years, but can you remember moments in your childhood maybe where you struggled with? What necessarily was your diagnosis too?
Yeah. I think there's many things that I can look back on and kind of pinpoint a few different symptoms that I'm like, oh, that could have been a red flag. Just I was always kind of a sensitive kid, so I think it might have been hard for people around me to really notice that I was struggling with something. And my initial diagnosis was depression and anxiety disorder. And I don't know if there was really a specific turning point of this triggered it or this onset it. It was just kind of years and years of suppressing, and it just kind of, eventually.
So you hid it
explodes.
For a while though.
Yeah, totally.
What was it like hiding it, I guess? What internally, what were you going through when you were hiding it those years in high school?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, exhausting. It's really exhausting. I was hiding it from myself as much as I was hiding it from other people. I was really, in denial for a lot of years. I think pride was really getting in the way of me recognizing that I was hurting and really coming to terms with the way that I was feeling and owning those feelings and not being ashamed for them. So I think as much as I was trying to pretend to be normal for other people, I was trying to put on that mask for myself, because I'm really a perfectionist at heart. So didn't want to appear weak even to myself or appear as a failure. And so I think at the end of the day, I remember every day when my head would hit the pillow, just really exhausted.
How do you know the difference, and maybe you've talked with other people, between maybe a personality trait versus this person might need medication and counseling? Where's the line between the two of them?
Yeah, totally. I think when it really starts to affect the way that you live out your daily life, I know a lot of people have talked about, mental illness, as much as it is mental, it affects the entire body. The brain is the most important part of your body. And so, of course, if your mind is suffering, your entire body is going to suffer, because your brain controls the whole body. So I was, a lot more sick. I was always kind of coming under different colds and flus. I think my immune system was really compromised, and my GI system, I was always struggling with nausea or stomach aches.
That's suppressing the stomach ache thing.
Yeah. And so I think I was dealing with a lot of just bodily symptoms as well, fatigue, constant headaches, or you name it, I was probably struggling with it. And so I think when it really starts to affect your daily life and affect your entire body, that's when you're realizing, oh wow, this is definitely something more than a personality trait.
So it was exhausting for you, but you also had thoughts of taking your own life, even attempts, right?
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that? I know that might be painful,
Yeah. So it's really interesting because my only exposure to suicide before having thoughts of it myself or, eventually attempting suicide was just kind of stories in the news of people who had taken their own lives, whether it was jumping off a bridge or whatever. And I remember as a kid, like, hearing these stories and thinking, like, those people are so selfish. They are so dramatic. Life's not that bad. Like, just having a lot of these negative stereotypes about suicide. And so when it came to, like, me really, really struggling and kind of hitting rock bottom, I had those negative stereotypes for myself. I'm like, Kristen, you are being so dramatic. You need to get yourself out of this. I didn't really see it as a result of this sickness that I was dealing with, a real sickness that, suicide is just a result of kind of the overlying sickness that someone's dealing with. And so I had struggled with suicidal thoughts for probably a few months before eventually attempting. And that was kind of the hitting point for me after my initial attempt, really just realizing how severe I was struggling. And then after I was admitted into a psychiatric hospital, kind of just everything coming to the forefront and recognizing that, like, what I was dealing with was a real sickness and that I shouldn't be ashamed to, like, seek out treatment for that, or I shouldn't be ashamed to recognize and acknowledge, like, how I was actually feeling. So, yeah.
So who helped you then feel that, like, okay, I gotta separate the way I'm feeling and the feelings of shame? Because basically that was driving you deeper and deeper into this darkness. How did you, like, come to separate that, I guess, the shame aspect?
Yeah, I think that was an ongoing process, but I think the initial thing that kind of triggered the unpacking of all that shame was a moment in the waiting room with my dad. And if you've heard anything of psychiatric waiting rooms, they're not fun. They're really understaffed. We were there for probably 13 hours, and you're just constantly retelling the story over and over again of what happened to multiple personnel. So in the midst of that, I was just really struggling with shame. And I remember crying to my dad saying, I'm so embarrassed, like, I'm a crazy person, like, why am I here? Just feeling really embarrassed that, like, I had ended up in this psychiatric hospital. And he said, Kristen, if you had a broken foot, we would be down the street at the children's hospital getting your foot taken care of. There's something not right with your brain, and we're going to get that fixed. And that's why we're at this hospital. And so he really just kind of broke it down into a practical level of, like, why, there's nothing to be embarrassed about. Like, we're going to seek treatment when
there's
there's
a problem with an organ.
like when there's something not working right in your body. And so that really kind of broke down the barriers within my own heart of just, like, Kristen, like, you would be seeking help for any other issue, so it's not different.
Are your parents people of faith then as well? Okay. Because God entered into this mess at some point too, and I think that's why you really have this, like I said, it's just a peaceful presence, like, very calming, So how did they pass on the faith to you, or how did God enter into your recovery?
Yeah, I mean, definitely the persistent prayers, I'm sure, of my parents. They were never like, oh, you need to, like, let God into your healing. I think it was just kind of their silent prayers for sure. But ultimately, God kind of re-entered the picture through me going back to confession for the first time in, like, it was probably 5 years that I hadn't gone to confession. Kind of really during the darkest years of me struggling. I really, could not relate to God, didn't want any part of him, was really, really distant from the faith. And then probably a few months after I was hospitalized and was, like, in pretty serious, like, treatment and therapy and was really healing psychologically, there was still kind of, like, that darkness and that hole that wasn't being filled completely, where I was, like, I was making a lot of strides psychologically, but there was still kind of something missing within healing. And I don't know what compelled me to go back to confession. I remember the woman that I was talking to, she had worked at my high school, and she was like, Kristen, you should, like, go to confession. And I was like, I don't believe in that. Like, it's stupid. I'm not talking to
This is during your healing?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was like, I'm not talking to some priest. Like, this is dumb. For some reason, I, like, ended up in the confessional, and I remember, yeah, just breaking down. I didn't even remember how to make a confession. And I just kind of started talking to this priest about everything that I had gone through the past couple of months. And I wasn't necessarily saying, like, these are sins, because they weren't. They were, yeah, just parts of my story as a result of sickness. And I remember he just said, like, it's okay. It's not your fault. And, like, the Lord doesn't think it's your fault, and he doesn't want you to live in shame, and he doesn't want you to feel guilty for this. And yeah, honestly, other than that, the whole confession is like such a blur. But I remember leaving and just feeling kind of that missing piece of healing that was finally like in its place, that yeah, no amount of therapy or no amount of medication like could have given me kind of just this sense of like wholeness. And yeah, I think it was just because like the Lord had wanted to console me within like this darkness and within this pain that I was experiencing. So that kind of brought him back into the picture in slow steps.
Now, I want to go into the healing part because I think that's beautiful. You just see how much God has worked in your heart. But also, to highlight the struggle, you also struggled with anorexia at one point. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Like there were a lot of elements of this. It wasn't just the suicide, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so that's really interesting as well, because I can really pinpoint more symptoms of an eating disorder within my childhood than I can depression. And I think a lot of times they play off of one another. Like if you're struggling with one, they kind of go hand in hand. Not always, but in multiple cases. And I remember that the eating disorder really didn't surface until I was in therapy after my suicide attempt. And it was just, yeah, within the midst of, I was pulled out of school for 2 months to go to therapy and like be in intense treatment, and it just seemed like a lot was out of control. And at the end of the day, eating disorders are really a control disorder. And so I think in the midst of me feeling like I was so out of control and kind of everything that was going on, I had just resorted to not eating,
Controlling the eating
and controlling my diet. And so then yeah, once you kind of let that in, it really becomes an issue. And so I struggled with that for a little bit.
A lot of people will say mental illness or even like eating disorders, there's an element of like spiritual warfare with it too. Could you feel the difference? Like when you were, even now I guess, when you're trying to live in the state of grace, but you still have the same brain, you know? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think it's a very nuanced kind of distinction, because while I've like recognized that depression and anxiety or even an eating disorder can be chronic, and these are things that I can struggle with even when I have a consistent prayer life and am frequenting the sacraments, that there is definitely a spiritual warfare element, because I think a lot of these issues are kept in the dark, and yeah, they're suppressed in shame. People don't want to open up about them. And so I think the devil capitalizes on that, and I think he really attacks those areas that you're like most shameful for and that you're hiding and kind of like not bringing to the light. And I think that's what was so powerful about me going back to confession, because even though I was talking about things in therapy, I was not as explicit as I was when I was talking with the priest. Like I was probably the most explicitly telling my story to him than I had been within the past few months. And so I think just the very fact that I was like speaking it and bringing it to light, like the devil no longer had domain over that. So I think, yeah, and I also really recognize that because it's in the mind, I think the devil can really get intertwined within the mind, and capitalize on things that are already there, just as he would take advantage of someone's physical suffering. You know, like there's a aspect of physical suffering that I think can also be a part of spiritual warfare, because like we know that like suffering is redemptive, and like the devil hates that. So of course he's going to like cling on to those and attack those things that can be like used for the Lord to glorify him. So I think that's kind of where like the spiritual warfare element enters.
I think that's a quote from St. Francis de Sales in the Introduction to the Devout Life. He says when you have feelings of like anxiety or depression, or like you said, different feelings, darkness, you should speak it to someone. Yeah. To bring it to the light. Yeah, totally. To dissipate it a little bit, or just to help them, help you work through it. Yeah. So, and I think that's why you started the Human Condition community. Yeah. Correct? Or the Human Condition, it's called. Is that part of the reason why you started that?
Yeah, I think because as my kind of reversion back to the faith happened in the midst of kind of a conversion of mental illness, of recognizing and kind of breaking down the stereotypes of mental illness that I had within my heart, and really like seeking treatment for that. And then kind of God entering into the picture. There was kind of a breaking point where I felt like I didn't fit in the church, and I felt like there wasn't a place for me because of these things that I had dealt with. And I had heard a lot of, negative and false narratives that like, mental illness isn't real, or that you can just pray through it. And it really is just, it's hurting to hear that when you're someone who is experiencing it, and it's so real, and it's such a thing that impacts so many people, and they have been rejected from the church because of that. And so I saw such a need to really integrate the conversations of faith and mental health, because ultimately, like, the Lord wants all of us. He wants our mind, body, and soul. And so if we're suppressing our mental illness because the church says it's not real, or kind of has these false ideas of what it is, then we're ultimately like rejecting potential saints from the church, because they're not becoming the person that God has created them to be, because they're not bringing to fulfillment like this one aspect of their life. Because there's just so much truth to learn about yourself, to learn about your relationship with God through seeking treatment and through seeking therapy, if you're struggling with these issues. And so I just saw such a need in the church to really bring to light these two topics that so many think are kind of mutually exclusive, but yet really complement each other really well, and ultimately bring about like the fullness of the human person.
I think like my experience, and I don't know you that well, but times that I've seen you just seem so whole, right? And I think maybe it comes from fully accepting your brokenness. Only then can you really let God's light shine through you. Mother Angelica has this quote, I think, we're all cracked pots. Did you ever hear that one? But like once you embrace who you are, and part of it is your cross, this struggle that you have, then you really can become, like you said, the person you were meant to be. Find your calling and to be a saint. So some people, I think, in the Catholic world will say you can just pray through it, right? Now, I don't know if this is, I'm just going to ask it. Do you take medication? Is it hard to find that balance of like medicine and prayer and grace and the sacraments, and you don't want to depend too much, and then you want God to work as well?
So I was on medication for probably about 3 years, and then was just doing really well, and my therapist was like, let's see, if we can get off of it. So I've been off of it for a few years, but am a full advocate for, if you need to be on medication, be on medication. Because at the end of the day, like depression and anxiety and other mental health disorders can be a chemical imbalance of the brain. So they're really just there to supplement the hormonal imbalance. But I think, they should always be taken in supplement to going to therapy. I think it kind of needs to be that both and, that you need to be working with both of those things. And it really does become a juggling act to make sure that like, my prayer life is good, I'm frequenting the sacraments, because they all really play into it. And I think that's just kind of the level of abandonment that the Lord's calling me to, that it is a juggling act, and that I need to kind of be responsible and take things into account of like what's affecting me, and what do I need every day to kind of be the best person and be the best version of myself, and to be like the most functioning person, And so, that means consistent prayer, and that means taking care of my body and exercise and eating the right diet and going to therapy and going to spiritual direction. So it does definitely become a lot and overwhelming, but if this is the cross that like, the Lord has asked me to bear, then I'll do it to become the saint that he wants me to be.
Right. Like some people have back pain all the time. You can't take more, like some painkiller all the time either. So it's like partly what you said, just bearing that cross. I'm pretty sure I struggled with like postpartum after my son. And that was so hard. And I think sometimes you feel like, oh, God, you're not enough. But like he is enough. But I found a lot of consolation in talking to people, I think. And also, like you said, there needs to be more awareness about this so people don't feel alone.
And I think like the Lord is so intentional and obvious about it because he's made us mind, body, and soul. And so, he's given us doctors for our body. We go to our doctor when we're not feeling well. He's given us a doctor for the soul. We go to priests for confession or guidance, and he's given us doctors for the mind. And so I'm still like so dumbfounded by the fact that people don't acknowledge it as real or as kind of like a necessary part of becoming whole, that we really just don't take advantage of kind of the resources that like the Lord has given to complement this aspect of like how we've been designed by him. And so I think I'm hopeful that like more conversation will happen in the church about it, because how many saints does the Lord want to bring about through this cross and through redemptive suffering?
Do you know of any, or do you pray through any?
Yeah,
right now?
So kind of my go-to girl has been Servant of God, Dorothy Day,
Okay.
because she actually had 2 suicide attempts, and I had 2 suicide attempts, so I feel very connected to her. Saint Edith Stein, I know, struggled with mental illness. Saint Ignatius of Loyola, Saint Therese, Saint Oscar Romero, and I'm sure there's a ton others. Saint Matt, I think it's Venerable Matt Talbot.
I think he was an alcoholic too.
Yeah. So there's so many saints out there, and I remember that helped me a lot, kind of coming into the church and recognizing all of these people in heaven who had struggled with such similar things that I did, because I had always heard of like the St. Paul's and like all of these people who struggled with like crazy things, crazy sin, crazy pasts, and I had never felt like I resonated with anyone who struggled with mental illness. And there's definitely a ton of saints up in heaven rooting for us, because I know that they deeply want to intercede for us.
And this is part of the calling that you feel the Lord has put on your life, to raise awareness and especially to integrate it with the Catholic faith.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about the human condition?
Yeah, so we are an organization in the works of becoming a nonprofit, which is a tedious process, but ultimately our goal is to cultivate hope, healing, and conversation around the integration of faith and mental health. So kind of, really just bringing to light these conversations that haven't been talked about in the church, and to really just provide hope and healing to individuals who have either been wounded by the church in some way or who have felt outcasted because of illnesses that they suffer with, and to really just bring them back and to let them know that they are seen and loved, and that like the Lord desires holiness for them in the midst of whatever they're struggling with.
So how do you do that through, like, in what way do you encourage people and inform?
Yeah, so really kind of the 3 main pillars of hope, healing, and conversation are broken down into sharing stories of others in the church, my stories of saints who have struggled with mental illness, and kind of how they allowed God to enter into that and enter into their healing to provide hope to people. I think just the power of a narrative is so healing for people to hear. And so then that kind of touches upon the healing aspect of like hearing these stories and knowing that you're not alone in the midst of what you're going through is just really healing for people to hear, I think. And also encouraging people to seek professional treatment if that's what they need. So there's a resource on our website that kind of is broken down into the states across the country of different Christian and Catholic counselors and therapists for people to reach out and really just get that professional help that they need. And then ultimately kind of the cultivation of the hope and healing aspect is just to promote conversation, to encourage people to talk about it, to open up about their own stories, and to just encourage people to go out into their own church communities and really advocate for awareness in this area.
Oh, that's great. So we pray God's blessing on the human condition. And you're on Instagram and you have a website, right? Is that your presence right now, right?
Yep. The Human Condition Community is our username. Yep.
The Human Condition Community.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing your
you.
story.